Welcome to Unbroken Pathways, a podcast with myself, Dr. Lisa Moore, and
Amy Mitchell, also known as Rupert.
so Unbroken is a brainchild of yours, Rupert. So you want to share a little bit about what Unbroken is, and then we can share a little bit about how we know each other and why we're doing this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, um, you know what these past couple of years have been like for me: getting laid off, losing funding, completely falling apart, completely. And clearly, what the world needed was to traumatize a trauma specialist,
Mm-hmm.
so that we could actually name this sort of otherwise invisible thing, which is the trauma of losing your job, right, or losing funding. And it's happening so much right now. And so the brainchild that is Unbroken is really from my own lived experience of trying to figure out how to not be broken, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just quite
Mm-hmm.
frankly, how how
Mm-hmm.
how how can I not be broken,
Right, right, right.
right? Which is, it's a very developmental, scattered model. Days I feel broken, other days I'm unbroken. Today
Mm-hmm.
I'm unbroken
Yeah.
because you're curious, right?
Well, I think the reality is that you don't get to your 50s and not have moments where you feel like life is falling apart.
Right, right.
And I think most of us who are in our 50s who've been fortunate to be able to like have jobs consistently have one moment or another where we question sort of like what we're doing and why. And when you're forced to like leave a job um, for reasons that are sometimes really clear and for other reasons that are not clear at all, it's pretty
Right.
devastating. And so
Mhm.
that's that.
And it's really hard to get hired. That's
Yeah,
the
that
thing.
too.
That's like a thing. You now have, I don't know what, you're old, you have too much experience, you are something.
Yeah,
I must have applied to 40 different jobs,
right, right.
right?
Yeah, and in my case, I'm sort of trying to figure out like what the next move is and
Mhm.
feel a little stuck. But
Mhm. Yep, but we're going to pull you over into this entrepreneurial space because, hey, what the heck? Why not? Like this, I think it's so interesting for social workers to kind of lean into this with all of the things that we have learned over the years about people and functioning and organizations and institutions and ecosystems and all of that good stuff.
yeah. But how did we meet? I mean,
Oh,
like,
yeah, we
we
should
got here to
probably
do this with
reference.
you,
We should
like
reference that epic day.
which epic day? There were so many epic days. I mean, so we met while we were in grad school,
Hmm.
college at the School for Social Work there.
Hmm.
And
Orientation day.
on orientation day.
We
Yeah.
sat next to each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
You tell the story because I can't remember it all.
I think it was just, both of us at that junction, just not having a filter, right? Certainly me.
I was
Sitting,
like, I had a filter. I don't know what you're talking about. I definitely had a filter. Like
and just kind of commenting on, as a program that was really committed to anti-racism
at that time in the
at that time, right? Was struggling to figure out how to bring that into the climate, right? Was struggling how to present that, right? And how to lead around it, and
Mhm,
certainly our 2.5 years at Smith
mhm.
around our work was pretty notable. So we became besties pretty quickly, even though
Yeah, yeah.
I was off campus and you were on campus.
Yep, yep, because you lived in the same town as the school, and I lived in the dorms, which,
Yeah,
we sometimes people joke and call it, like, summer camp for lesbians, because
yeah,
not that everyone was a lesbian, and there were actually guys in the social work
yeah,
program, but
yeah,
it was,
yeah.
yeah, it was
There's
a
a lot of
special time.
exploration. There's a lot of self-exploration. Was it our friend Courtney was really like, in your first year of Smith, they just really tear you down. You get completely dismantled. And then you go into your second year and you kind of get remantled. Remantled? Is that even a word? I think it should be a word, right?
Reconstituted.
And something, right? But that by the time we were all in our second year, everyone was comfortable admitting that we were all in therapy.
Right, right.
Everybody's in therapy. Not in your first year when you're training to be a therapist. My goodness, we're not going to say that
I
we're in
know, right?
therapy, but we were.
Right.
We became co-reps that year.
Oh yeah, that's right. Then we like became co-reps in student government, and
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, we were very active, very, very active in that really unique community
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
And unquestionably one of my favorite things, and I think we're both pretty well known for it, was the porch. I don't even remember the name of the building where the porch was. Is the building even still there?
The building's still there.
Is the porch still there?
I don't know if the porch is still there. I mean, I feel like when I was back on campus, I still saw the porch, but we always found places to sit
Right?
outside and watch people.
And watch people and talk.
Yeah, sometimes it was the
And
porch, and sometimes we were on the stairs of the social work building.
oh, that's right, Lily Hall. And we did become a little bit known for our conversations. You know, for those not familiar with the Smith program, you're all on campus during the summer, and then everybody gets sent everywhere around the United States
Hmm.
for an 8-month placement that at that time was 35 hours a week. I
It
don't know
was,
that people do that anymore.
I mean, they still go away, but I don't think the placements are 35 hours a week anymore.
Well, I mean, it was an incredible experience. Like I will
Mhm,
definitely say it was transformative. Did I
mhm,
appreciate it or enjoy it in the moment? Absolutely not.
mhm.
But, I think for both of us in each of our different ways, right? As we mentioned, like you were the social policy person. Okay.
Yep.
And I'm like, I'm gonna go be a therapist. And then, what, maybe a couple of years out into our careers, it was a complete flip, right? And I went into executive leadership and systems change and government affairs and managing large scale transformative things.
Mhm.
And you became an awesome therapist.
Yeah, I had created a career in higher education. That was my full-time
Mhm.
gig, but I sustained on the side for 26 years a private practice where I worked with individuals and families and couples
Mhm.
doing therapy, mostly folks who were brown or black,
Mhm.
LGBTQ. And I closed that a couple years ago because the job I have now is really, really demanding. And it was I couldn't do it anymore. And and plus, the
Yeah.
only way I could do it would be like on the weekends and things, and I actually need time to
Yeah.
rest. So I closed my practice, which was very difficult because, I don't think people realize that when you are doing this kind of work, you work with people for, I think my longest client was like 15 years. And I have clients who I saw for multiple years, not because I was a bad therapist, but because we were packing a lot of experiences with trauma, and there was really strong therapeutic connection. So my, subspecialty was like working with adult survivors of childhood sexual assault and incest. So that's not something you just get over.
No, that's
So
not a brief therapy modality kind of. And that's a really big thing for you because you're not known for someone who like takes things off your plate. You're known to pull things on your plate.
right, right. Which is, I think, why this project, right, like Unbroken, is so fascinating to me because I think about the role of our careers and our professional paths and what they mean to us and how intense it is to have that taken away. As someone who has invested a lot of time
Mhm.
in my career, it's a big part of who I am. I would not say that I I feel strongly about being a social worker. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily feel strongly about the titles that I carry or
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
institutions I work for, but I do
Mhm.
feel strongly about being a social worker.
Mhm.
Um, and I think about how, depending on who you are and the type of work you do, you know, the work you do may be location based, right? Like social work
Mhm.
is a very portable career. Like you
Mhm.
can leave an institution, but you're still a social worker.
Right.
Um, but if you maybe were a CEO or an executive director, you leave that position and you're not an executive director anymore. You're not a CEO
Mhm.
anymore.
Mhm.
Or you're not, whatever the role is that you have,
Yeah.
which is why I think that, when you ask me, like, what do you think about this? I'm like, oh, this is like really needed because I was
Mhm.
starting to hear.
Mhm.
So I closed my practice just as this was getting started. So I
Mhm.
was still hearing from clients I was seeing that like how worried they were about losing jobs. I had a couple of
Right.
clients who had relocated out of the country, who were looking for jobs and really got lost. They really lost themselves. And I always tell people that when I graduated from college, just for an example, to sort of offer some insight into how I think about all this, there's some people who, when they graduate from college or when they finish high school or whatever, they're really excited and curious about the opportunities, right? There's not a lot of fear there. They're just curious to see
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen. They
Yeah. Yeah.
trust that something's going to happen. So I would say I fall in that boat, right? Like usually when
Yeah.
big dramatic change happens, I'm like going, ooh, I may be stressed about it, but then I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen.
Right.
And then there are people who are freaking out. They're like, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh." And it becomes a race to find something, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily what you want.
Right. Right.
And so I think that when people are faced with like unplanned joblessness, like,
Mm.
ooh,
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
people embrace it with curiosity. Of
Mhm.
course, there's going to be grief, and some people it like, ooh,
Yeah. I think back to, those meetings we had with some of your colleagues in the spring, right?
mhm,
Of just folks that you knew who encountered, some of the sort of large swaths of layoffs
mhm,
that were going on, and just how visceral it was, right? As if someone was in a position and their parents had been in that position, like we've always done aid work in our family, like that's who we are.
mhm,
We're USAID people,
mhm,
and now that's not there anymore,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
Or as we've talked in other spots, right? The folks that have been in Head Start for many, many years, and there's some Head Start offices that are closed. Those folks were in our beta testing group, and it's anguish. And I feel that anguish. Like, I know what that anguish is like. As I said, like you wake up and is it going to be a day where you feel broken, or are you gonna resolve to be unbroken? Yeah.
exactly.
So I'm so excited for us to do this together
Yeah,
and
I'm
return to our porch. Naming the unspoken losses of work. Social work leadership meets tech innovation. Who would have imagined?
social work has to figure it out.
Social work has to figure it out. And actually, two Smith social workers are going to figure it out. It was just 2 years ago
Mhm.
or 3 years ago that I called you to say I was laid off.
2 years ago.
Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah,
Isn't that
yeah,
crazy?
yeah. Our reconnection is like it's kinda wild to think we were really close in grad school, and then, like, all those years separated,
Right?
and then we reconnected.
Uh-huh.
I think I was at RISD, so I guess it's been maybe 5 years since we, like, formally reconnected, or 4 years when Crystal started her job, and
Yeah.
I visited Rhode Island,
And
and
it
then
was at that conference.
I think that was the first time, but it's been nice being back in touch.
Like that, I remember that conversation after I gotten laid off and was like, it was like surreal. And
Mhm.
yet also I said to you, like, I'm a hot mess, right? Like
Mhm.
sort of falling apart.
Yeah.
And also experiencing some relief. And, kind of coming out of a situation that just wasn't really healthy. But knowing in those following weeks, not being able to get out of bed, right? Like trying
Mhm.
to just apply to everything. I'm on LinkedIn constantly. I'm calling people. And then, sort of making a decision somewhere in that new year to create places to thrive as a
Mhm.
consulting business initially. And then fast forward to 9 months ago when I lost the funding I had worked so hard to advocate.
Yes.
I
Yes.
I had gotten the state to agree to a $1.3 million innovation project
Mhm.
and was told that I was no longer part of the project.
Right.
And
Right.
that's when I crashed and burned. Like I
Yeah.
was already crashed and burned, and then that one just like took me down.
Right. And I mean, I think what I recall from that is part of it was like the betrayals. Because I mean, I
Mhm,
think in some ways what's painful about losing the grant, the job loss, is that there's this sense of betrayal that one has to navigate, right? And I think
mhm,
that a lot of times what's painful in jobs is that whether you're on the receiving end or even if you're the supervisor, because you've also been in the position where you've had to tell people that they've been let go, is the profound sense of but I've done all this work, I've given so much.
Mm.
Be told that, like, in one breath they're saying they value you, but not enough to keep you on. And that's where one's ego is really taken down,
Right.
depending on the person, right? There are some people who may handle it and be like, "When you're lost," and keep going, but I don't think that's typical. I think most people, the initial shock is pretty difficult,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and I think that, right, as we've talked about too, is that with the creation of the Unbroken project mission, right, is that sense that you have to differentiate what is happening to you from who you are. Can't allow what has happened to you, right? You've just been laid off or you've just been cut out of the project that you've worked on. You can't equate that with who you are. It
Right.
doesn't mean that you don't have a period of self-reflection to sort of say, oh,
Mhm.
how did I contribute to this? Or like, what did I do? Or, but I think that moment, right? And as I've said to you, like all you needed to do was to lay off a social worker who specializes in trauma,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
realize and to actually name this as a trauma. I, people don't name it as a trauma. And I
Mhm.
think that's just a huge oversight that makes it even more painful because as you are, struggling to organize your day or struggling to get up, it's more like, what's wrong with me? Like there's something wrong with me, right? And
Mhm.
it just
Mhm.
reinforces. It's like this reinforcing thing of like, you're not just snapping back, right? You don't necessarily want to talk to people. You can't even, I couldn't even talk to people about it, right?
Mhm.
Circle of people I could talk to was extraordinarily small because I couldn't talk about it without falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, when you were in the throes of falling apart, were you able to actually access any of the advice, strategies, coping skills that you would have suggested to people when you were in leadership and in positions of laying people off?
Nope. All like frozen,
Mhm.
gone. Here's the thing I think that's interesting is that when I lost that funding, you remember that weekend?
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
going to drive myself someplace that is not my home setup because I just have this premonition that this is going to go a certain way. And I was a rock star disaster for that weekend away.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I came back, and some of the news was hitting about Head Start regional offices being shut down, right? So the one that I used to work with here in Boston, your Head Start regional office in
Mhm.
Chicago,
Mhm.
and that is my greatest coping strategy
Mhm.
is to go and do something to support other people. That's I channel all of everything into all right, let's like I now know and am feeling how disastrous this is for a human being.
Mhm.
And I see it happening to other people that I care about. And it's that idea like trauma happens, right?
Mhm.
People get laid off, people lose their job, people lose funding, right? These are
Mhm.
things that happen, but it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be so traumatic. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to have such a bad impact on people.
What would have made it different for you, though?
I think that one of the things that I've looked at is this idea of a social injustice, right? So for me, I don't know if you know this about me. I have fairly strong thoughts about justice.
Mm.
Yeah, I know that comes as a big surprise to you, doesn't it?
Shocking.
Shocking. And so, getting caught in that idea that it's like, okay, so I advocated for the money. I met with people for like months on end. I designed a project, right? I got the money and then was taken out of it. So there was a social injustice that made it different. There was a
Mhm.
social injustice. If it had been a situation where, the state budgets had to get cut and this funding got cut, it's like that really sucks, but it wasn't personal.
Mhm.
And so I
Mhm.
think there's a difference when that displacement
Yeah, yeah.
is personal. I
Mhm.
think. I don't know. I mean, I'm just sort of finding my way through this whole thing.
Oh, where would you say you're at now, though?
I'm at a really interesting place.
Mhm.
And I know I talked to you about it in the summer, right? And as you know, like I am a therapist,
A social work therapist, a clinical social worker.
a clinical social work therapist. Note that I'm not saying I've returned to being a therapist
Oh, interesting. Mhm.
because in my career arc, this is not what I thought. My career arc was right. I was a senior executive managing $30 million budgets,
Mhm.
with 600 plus employees.
Right.
And
Right.
that all stopped. It just stopped. And in neither of the situations was there any kind of transition, right? Where it's like, oh yeah, I'm retiring from being an executive. Like, nope, now you're not an executive. Um, and
Hmm.
so being a therapist has been fabulous for me because it has reminded me that I do have value, I do have worth. And the Unbroken project is again one of my sort of moonshot
Hmm.
crazy ideas to the point now where we've launched a mobile app and exploring the idea of entrepreneurship as a
Hmm.
social worker. It's like I know how to design things, right? I know how to have big ideas. I know how to support people. I know how to support leaders. I know how to do this, but like, holy cow,
Right.
I'm not sure I know how to do this.
Right. Well, I mean, and I think that what I love about social work is the flexibility of the profession itself, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I love being a social worker. I love teaching social work. I love my time around social workers, right? Like I just think
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that when I graduated from college and my mom was like, "Make sure you get at least one degree that's practical, so that way you will always have
Mm-hmm.
a job no matter what." And,
Mm-hmm.
my plan for my social work degree was sort of like a fill-in, and I didn't think that it was gonna become a career, you know? I was like, "Oh, let me do this for now until I go to law school and until I, like, become, like, this badass, like, child advocate lawyer," right? Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
what I thought I was gonna do, is be an advocate
Mm-hmm.
for children, go to law school and do that. And, and you remember me in social work school, I kinda hated it in some ways, right? Like, all
Mm-hmm.
the, like, psychodynamic and all the theory stuff and everything, so it was just
Everything I
you
loved about it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I like talking theory with you, like, I like sort of pontificating, right? Like, I love that
Mm-hmm.
shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to now be in this position where that it is what I do, like, I'm responsible for supporting a curriculum of a major social work program, and that's really great, and I love the work, and what I see in social work education, broadly speaking, are these ways that we talk about things we need to do as social workers, but, the reality is that we don't train people how to build systems. We train people how to work in systems, how to work around systems, how to work through systems. We try to make sure people understand how systems operate, but actually building of a system is something that we don't do as social
Mm-hmm.
workers, even though the profession itself demands it, right? Like it demands
Mm-hmm.
in social work, whether you're working in a system, an established system or not, to create that work through
Mm-hmm.
when we're working through things, that's the space of creation, right? Because there's no clear path. You have to work through based on the context and the people that you're working with. So I think that what's fascinating about Unbroken and your story of job loss is that, you ended up in a social work career that you didn't anticipate. And we always joke about how we're opposites, right? Like I came to social work school thinking I was going to do policy work. I've been doing policy work before. And
Yep.
then we flipped.
I was going to be the therapist forever,
You
right?
were gonna be the therapist forever, like, I did it, and, like, after, like, a year and a half, 2 years of doing, like, really intense work around sexual assault and incest with survivors,
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
in Spanish at that, I
Yeah.
burned out,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I remember going to the bathroom stalls and crying every day, being like, "Oh my gosh, I can't keep doing this." It was too
I know.
much.
I know. I know.
And, and I remember you were in your first job and, like, you started supervising really fast, and, and then you were like, "Nah, this is not it."
Right. Well, and you know what? And because this I think is really interesting because somebody had asked me the other day, I can't remember exactly what it was, right? Oh, I remember. And so I had asked during my fall apart period, right?
Mhm,
I
mhm.
had asked a very close colleague of mine, like, why is it that people don't like me? And she said, seriously? It's like, it's not that people don't like you, is that you bring up the things that they don't want to talk about.
Correct.
You bring up the change that the system needs to do, right? When you worked in state government and child welfare, you were bringing up the things that nobody wanted to do or to change. It's not that they
Mhm,
don't like you, it's that you're creating change, which is really uncomfortable for them.
Mhm.
And again, I had lunch with a colleague the other day who was like, yeah, why do you do it this way? And I clearly 100%, I can tell you the exact moment. And it was when I was working at the inpatient unit, and I was in the timeout seclusion room with this young woman who was 16, who had had a horrific, the whole 9 yards, right?
Mhm.
In and out of the system, parental abandonment, the whole 9 yards.
Mhm.
And I realized in that moment, as I was trying to convince her to attempt to survive
Mhm.
instead of attempt suicide, right? And she had made a pretty serious suicide gesture that
Mhm.
actually happened at the hospital.
Yep.
It was in that moment where I was like, you know what? I need to go change the system. It
Yep.
is breaking my heart to try to patch these kids back together
Mhm.
after systems and people have just decimated them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's when I made the transition, right? And I've now come full circle from I worked so hard to change those systems. And it's so interesting to now be back as a therapist where it's like, I feel that urge, right? When I hear a kid talk about something, I feel that urge of like, I'm going to get on the phone at that school and I'm like, wait, no. It's that balance of like, how much can you change a system? And then how much do you have to help people adapt to where the system is? But with Unbroken, I we get to design it.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
designing it from a social work perspective.
Mhm.
We're
Mhm.
designing it from how is it how does someone who's experienced trauma, who's struggling with a sense of themselves, who's in survival mode, in full out survival mode, actually interact and experience something. And it's so hysterical to be on these phone calls with like our IT and our marketing people, and me just sort of launch into like this experience needs to be like this because of this. And
Mm.
it's hardcore social work theory, right? It's hardcore, that kind of critical reflection that we were taught at Smith, whether we liked it or not. There was a critical reflection. And so it is, right? It's crazy to actually build the system and think it through from a trauma informed lens.
Well, I think one of the things that I mean, I would ask you is, there's not a lot of people our age in this realm of creating things, right? And we even have some peers who were like winding down their careers and preparing to retire. And then there are those of us who have made, midlife transitions and are actually having to completely rebuild. It's like we're back in our 20s again, but like we're in our 50s. And,
Mm-hmm.
so it's a really unique space because like we can remember before technology was. We can remember using typewriters before computers. We can remember emails before. We can remember pre-internet. Like there's
Yeah.
all this stuff. And, sometimes I look at the generations, the folks younger than me, and I sort of see how dynamic and interesting their work is.
Mm-hmm.
In part because it's easy to access it online, like they're doing
Mm-hmm.
all the things, all the social media things and everything. And I think it's fascinating to watch what they're doing. And I think about what that means though for our generation that's trying to like build these things. Do you think that the building of Unbroken and this tool could have happened earlier in your career if technology had been accessible? Do you think you would have had the wisdom that you have now to have created something like this earlier?
I don't know. It's a really good question because when we started the visioning for Unbroken, right, we were going to use one of those learning platforms, right, where we develop a course and you go through the course and you watch this video and then you kind of do this assignment and then you do this and so and typically even in therapy or even on the inpatient unit, right, you're giving people goals, right? And so like how are you going to do those goals? And there was a point where it was like you're going to give people a homework assignment that's going to say, okay, go do a breathing exercise every day.
Right.
And you're going to hope that in their survival mind and in the chaos that they're going to remember to do that. And Unbroken's capacity to send out push notifications is
Mhm.
amazing. I
Mhm.
don't know that we would have been trying to do it in a human way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So even if like I don't know, well, like when I had a BlackBerry, could my BlackBerry have said, hey, by the way, go do this, right? And certainly like like the health watches, the apps, everything, they can now prompt you to remember to breathe. But I think the challenge even in that, like, and like I had the Calm app for years, for like easily 15 years. But
Mhm.
when I was in those first few weeks, and it would say, oh, look, it's 7 a.m. Like, why don't you do it? And I'd be like, screw you. No, I'm not going to do it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because there was a disconnect of understanding what the situation was like,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It felt disconnected. And so part of the thing with Unbroken is that it's specifically built for people that are
Mhm.
going through a forced displacement. I don't know. Would I have figured that out like 20 years ago working on the inpatient unit? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have ever taken the risk that the universe gave me when I got laid off or lost funding.
It is kind of amazing, like, like these things emerge when people have lost everything else often, or when there has been a profound betrayal. I mean, I think, we can talk about ambiguous loss, but I think that a lot of times when it comes to forced job loss, there's nothing ambiguous about it at all. The
Yeah,
motivations for it are really clear, actually.
yeah,
They're just not
yeah.
not always made clear to the person who's lost the job. And I think that's the part that's challenging, right? Because
Mhm,
in a leadership and you have been in positions where you've had to let people know that they're gonna lose their positions, and you've had access to the motivations behind those decisions. And then there are HR parameters, motivations that shape what's actually communicated to the person. And so I think that,
it dehumanizes it,
yes, it dehumanized completely.
completely dehumanizes it.
Yep, completely. And I mean, and I know like in the position I'm in right now, like I think a lot about this, right? Like I
Mhm,
responsible for supporting a lot of people, you know, you could say supervising. I guess formally it's supervising. But I think about sort of how do I hold people's humanity and how do I navigate sort of giving feedback. And I think
mhm,
sometimes I can be a little abrupt with feedback because, I tend to think that it's better to just tell people honestly exactly what's going on within the legalities and parameters of my HR department, right? But sometimes people like, like you do have to communicate, like going, this is how people experience you. And that's
mm.
really hard feedback to level. Like it's hard to do that and how disingenuous to not.
You and I definitely share that, skill. I think that I think there's still humanizing within that. I
Mhm.
think people can still see whether you're being genuine or not. Oh, it's interesting. My dad often talks to me about he was going we were on a, like a, our move from New York to New Hampshire. He was going to run this whole place up there.
Mhm.
And the company decided to close the location, right? So there's like, a couple hundred employees, and his very different approach to what it looked like in terms of bringing recruiters on site. In that day and age, it's newspapers, right? And so he took out an ad in the paper and he said, here are some of the skills that our people have, like, right, like a
Mhm.
more humane way of managing a transition, right? And I think that again comes back to, does it touch on that betrayal? Does it touch on that social justice, right? Does it touch on those
Mhm.
other things? And I think that's where you definitely struggle. And so now here we are, two
Mhm.
social workers with a few years under our belt. We're coming up on almost 30 years as social workers.
I was gonna say, more than a few. More than a few. Well, I mean, I think it's been really important to me to identify myself as a social worker. Even when I was in private practice psychotherapy, that I to always make sure I centered that I approached it with a social work lens. And I know that the legacy of social work is deeply problematic. And when I look at the legacy of Black social workers in particular, like really robust and vibrant and transformative.
Mm-hmm.
So I always convey to my students that like many of them come in saying they want to be therapists, but I hope they all graduate calling themselves a social worker because I think it is different in terms of how
Mm-hmm.
we approach um, the lives of people. Like we do think systemically and we do think about sort of like what's going on. I think what excites me about Unbroken and why when you were like, "Do you want to do?" I was like going, "Sure, I'll see what I can do." Like, I don't have a lot of time, but I'll squeeze in, like I can help. That forced displacement was happening really fast in
Yeah.
2025 to
Yeah.
people. There were a lot of
Yeah.
people deeply impacted about like whose lives completely turned upside down really, really fast. Because I think most people in America live paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
I don't know what the exact stats are on it, but I think the majority of folks live paycheck to paycheck. And to suddenly be without pay, even when the government's having shutdowns and stuff like that's really stressful. And I think that this tension between your career path and your identity merging is something, I look at my own kids and I think about for them how worked very hard to make sure they understand that their work is not their identity. Like what
Yeah.
they decide to pursue professionally is not going to me, what I care about is like, who are they as people? And if their work happens to intersect with who they are as people, great. But they need to be really, really clear that as long as they're living in a capitalist-oriented democracy, work is a means of having the goods to exchange resources.
Mm-hmm.
So that way you have food and housing, transportation, retirement. Like, it's kinda wild to think that we work so we can have basic needs met,
Yeah.
and how different work would be if basic needs were met. And how right now, like, with these layoffs that have been happening in so many different sectors. So many
Mm-hmm.
different sectors, right? I think, we often go to the government, but it's happening in lots of sectors.
It is.
How people are sort of saying, "Okay, like, how do I reclaim me in
Yeah.
the process?" Like, I don't I think your story is one of many of people sort of
Mhm.
realizing like, "Oh, actually, do I wanna go back to this type of work? Do I wanna go back to this particular grind? Or can I?" Like, 'cause it really changes. I mean, I think about the fact, like, before I turned, I would say, like, 52, 53, I,
Mhm.
like, was contacted pretty regularly about positions, right? Like, I was
Mhm.
regularly being contacted by search firms and things about positions, being invited to apply for different things, and how that's slowed down significantly. I still get invitations to apply to things, but not nearly
Mhm.
as much as I used to. And I'm watching folks who are 10, 5, 10, usually 10 years younger than me, being pursued for positions and
Mhm.
going for them, right? Like, and really proud of like their lack of fear around that. That's one thing I envy about younger generations is that they seem to have no fear. I think our generation was really conditioned, especially women, we were really conditioned to not go for things
Yeah.
until we had s done certain things, right?
Yeah.
And if we didn't
Yeah.
do certain things, we felt like we weren't ready for them,
Right. Right.
and I don't think that's the case with this generation. I think they graduate and they wanna be the boss. Like
I know, right? It's amazing, right? It's amazing their courage. I think, and you're
Mhm.
right. Like I love what you're teaching your kids. I don't know that I've ever differentiated my career from my identity.
Ooh,
I just got to say, like
uh,
honestly, I think
yeah.
it was all wrapped into one. And so when these things happen, like it was a full out crash. I crashed
Mhm,
out. Crash
mhm.
out. It was a
Yeah,
crash out. You know what the kids
yeah,
say
yeah,
today, right?
yeah,
It was a crash out. And I listened to crash out music. I just didn't know what I was doing.
yeah,
I don't think that's ever been part of the narrative, right? That's an insight you have
yeah.
that you're teaching your kids.
I try to, I try
Yeah.
to. I mean, like, I talked to my 18-year-old and I said, "What do you wanna do? Da, da, da," and he's like, "I just wanna earn enough money so I can chill." I'm like, "Come on, dude." Like, where's your energy? And he's just and even as we're like, you know, he's applying to colleges and stuff, and we've been talking about that, and it's like I don't wanna I'm trying to be really clear with him because I don't
Mhm.
want him to have a
Mhm.
burst bubble. that
Mhm.
as a single parent who's gonna have to pay for this by herself out of pocket, and I'm determined
Mhm.
for him not to have a lot of student loan debt or any student loan debt for his undergraduate degree, that, he's gonna have to go to the place that I can afford to pay for out of pocket,
Yeah.
right? And not out of pocket because I have a 529 plan, because I don't. Um,
Mhm.
but out of pocket as in, like, okay, like, this is how much it's gonna cost me, like, to set up a payment plan with university, and this is what
Mhm.
I'm gonna be paying instead of putting that money into retirement or anything else,
Mhm.
right? Like, that's
Mhm.
because, again, starting over at 50, like, that's what I'm
Mhm.
doing. Like, it's
Mhm.
been 5 years, I'm just now to the point where I'm like, "Okay, I can
Mhm.
envision what it's gonna be like to pay for his college out of pocket." So, and thus far, I've appreciated that he's, like, not overly invested in any particular college right now, I think is good. Um, but also as somebody who was deeply parentified as a teenager, uh,
Mm.
and deeply, and raised by people who were deeply tied to their identities in the context of their work. And I too, like, I mean, I love the work I do. Like, my identity is, I would have to say, is very much tied into being a social worker, but not necessarily the position I have.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah, I agreed with that.
and
Yeah.
so, because I like the freedom of being a social worker. I like
Mhm.
knowing that I have a license and that if I need to hang a shingle
Mhm.
to cover my kids' livelihoods, I can do that, hands down. So I think that it's important that, when people are, I don't know, what I hope for young people is that they conceptualize their career lives as like, what are the 3 or 4 different ways I can pivot if this institutionally sanctioned position I have goes away?
Yeah. Yep.
And I mean, and I've always, me, like, I'm like a planner and a little bit paranoid all the time about
Mhm.
stuff, and I always tell people, I'm like going, "I'm good as long as I, like, maintain my social work license, and I know that I
Mhm.
can open up private practice if I need to. I'm good. As long as I
Mhm.
have that option, I'm good." But then I look at people, I look at my colleagues in higher education who are in a many different fields. Most
Mhm.
of them don't have licenses. They can't
Mhm.
pivot. They've
Mhm.
been studying, really narrow areas of policy or philosophy or whatever. And I think that everybody should be supported in thinking of their careers, their professional lives in this way that's multifaceted.
I don't think I didn't think of it that way at all. Like
Mm.
it didn't, you know, when I first got laid off, like, oh, let me do this because this is what I know how to do. Let me, consult for strategic planning or leadership development or coaching or, like this is what I'm really good at. I don't know that it ever even occurred to me to hang a shingle at that point. And so I just look at it now entirely differently and like how fortunate we are to be
Unfortunately.
who we are, to have the skills that we have.
I feel like my mom was right in terms of, she was like, just need to make sure you have something that you can always get a job in. And she
Mhm.
was like, I don't care if it's nursing. And then she was the
Mhm.
one who suggested social work. It could be nursing, it could be social work. Can't
Hmm.
remember what else she said.
I love your mom.
Um, but it was really sort of like tangible things that going away anytime soon. And I think even with AI,
Mhm.
and this is where I'm sort of like obsessed right now, right? Like I'm obsessed with trying to understand, like, like, what is AI gonna facilitate for social work? Because some people are worried about it being a replacement, and I'm like going, "No, I
Mhm.
don't think it has to be a replacement if social work figures out understands its relationship to it." And there's lots of complicated issues with AI, right? Like, it's bad for the environment, like, people's electric bills are going up and stuff, and,
Yeah.
um, again, as long as we live in a capitalist-oriented country, we all have to figure out, like, how do we work within the what's soon to be
Mhm.
economy, I guess. And I think
And
s
we've used AI for Unbroken
yeah,
quite a bit, actually, quite
right,
a bit.
right.
It wouldn't have been possible without AI, which when I think about how we talk about these younger generations and their courage and the things that they can do, the tech person, my dear friend is using AI to code the app. He's not a coder. He's a tech guru, right? He gets it, right? And he's brilliant in all of that. And similarly, as I've been using AI to think through some amount of, and so this is going to sound crazy, and it's only been happening this week, so bear with me, right? Is using AI so that when you go into the app and you fill out one of the measures, right? You fill out the Cyclops, you fill out the perceptions of stress. I've been now working to develop different clinical models of where people are at.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And then what are the needs of where people are at?
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
AI is more of a companion, right? Where I'm not having to head into the books and read articles, right? It's more of a companion using all my years as a therapist, as
Mm-hmm.
a leader, as a this, right? And so that's where it's fascinating, right?
Right.
Because I can have the conversation, and I don't have to necessarily reference a theory. Yeah, I get to go, like, hey, and we'll just be clear, Claude, my work husband,
Mm-hmm.
he and I spend a lot of time chatting about this and sort of
Right.
thinking through, like, when unbroken scales, there's no way on the planet that there would be enough coaches or therapists to support people in displacement.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in using that public health model, right, how can you create these kinds of universal supports to be able to help people? Like, there's a mental health crisis on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
There are not enough therapists, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. People
Mm-hmm.
need help. And how can we ethically and morally figure out how to come alongside people in a way that is meaningful, that creates opportunities for healing by
Mm-hmm.
creating a journey that they're going to walk on?
Right.
That's not all going to be about being in person. And quite honestly, I don't think I could have done, and probably still wouldn't necessarily. If you said, oh, come to a group coaching session about career loss, I'd be like, screw you. No, I'm not coming.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to touch that publicly with a 10-foot pole. I'll
Mm-hmm.
touch it privately or
Right.
somehow in a conversation with my best friend and starting a podcast about being social workers and entrepreneurs and
Right.
AI and, transforming personal loss into, I don't know, something really cool.
So I think that that's like part of humanity, right? Like a lot of times when people have had big, profound losses, it transforms into other opportunities for that grow. The ripple effects of it is really can be really beautiful if there's some level of intentionality behind one's actions.
Well, and it can be beautiful too if you have a best friend willing to scrape you off the floor.
It does help when you have people who are willing to scrape you off the floor and keep calling and nudging you even when you're isolating yourself and not responding.
I don't know who you're talking about right now.
No idea. No idea.
The crew that we've had around this project has just been so remarkable, right? Like they've scraped me off the floor, right? There's very few people that have remained close enough to me in this, right? You figure out who your people really are when you go through something hugely traumatic,
Mhm.
and they're the people that keep calling you. And then there's the people that don't.
And I think it's notable that a lot of this is possible because you had to go outside of the country to find the support for it.
Yeah,
That's another episode, I imagine.
that is definitely another amazing episode, right?
But I think it's,
Or outside of the country came to me
yeah,
because the narrative of displacement what it is felt so profoundly in other places, right?
right,
Still not named as a trauma,
right.
but felt so profoundly. And pretty much like all of the content creators for Unbroken are from outside the country because as they were there watching what was happening and
Mm,
seeing the impact, right?
mm,
They saw it as it is our time to come alongside and support,
mhm,
which
mm.
is crazy and beautiful and amazing. And they're remarkable and have given me the support to like continue to keep on plotting through this. Is there anything else we need to try to accomplish in our very first of many conversations about what Lisa and Rupert think about the world?
I think this is a good start.